Welcome to Education Forum. I'm Herman Badillo, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University. The improvement of education affects all New Yorkers. This program will focus on the key educational issues and challenges before us all. My guest today is Edward Stancik, who is the Special Commissioner of Investigation for the New York City School District. Mr. Stancik was appointed in 1990 to his present position, and prior to that, he was an assistant district attorney in Manhattan. He's a graduate of Columbia University School of Law and a graduate of the University of Illinois. Well, tell me now, after 10 years as a Special Commissioner of Investigation, what have you learned about the problems of corruption in the New York City School District?
Well, I learned that corruption is a problem that's never done. I mean, you're never finished with the work. We worked very hard to do the corruption cases in the local school boards that led to the school governance reform in the mid-90s. But
that is the fact that you found a number of cases where school board members were getting paid for voting to appoint principals.
Right, we had briberies to appoint principals, backroom deals where jobs were given to political supporters, unnecessary administrative jobs created to keep backers happy, taking away resources from the classroom. And the result was a school governance law which moved more power to the chancellor.
In other words, now before that law, the school boards alone made the decision, that is, the members of the school board about which principals to appoint. Now that has to be approved by the chancellor.
By the chancellor, and the difference was that unfortunately in many districts what was happening was that the principals who did political work or candidates who did political work and contributions were those who got the jobs instead of necessarily the best educators. So really we wanted to see people focus on education first and empower the chancellor to ensure that. And, I think there's a very positive development, but there still are problems, and you have to deal with them as they come.
But at least that much is settled. What about the issue of custodians? What has happened in that issue since the time that you took office?
Well, when I got here in 1990, there was a lot of give and take about whether there was custodial corruption, whether the system resulted in unfair balances for the custodians. And part of what I wanted to do was to resolve that one way or the other. And so we did an investigation, and we looked at many custodians and looked at the system. What we found is that many custodians were, in fact, not in school working on their buildings, but had completely separate careers. Mm-hmm. You may remember the fellow who was on the boat. We had another fellow who was a charter pilot for hire who would be jetting around the country when the school ran out of toilet paper. So, and we found many like that. So the labor contract was changed to give the board more power over the custodians. And again, I think that has helped, but we still have investigations in that area.
Well, the biggest complaint I get about custodians from different sources is that custodians still decide what's going to happen in the school, that the principal can't really tell the custodian what to do, and even the chancellor, that they act as if they, in effect, own the building, the school buildings.
That is still a problem.
Why should that be? I mean, why shouldn't they be employees of the school system, subject to some kind of accountability through the principal or the community superintendent or the chancellor or the board?
Well, they should be, and to a small extent, they are. We were able to obtain, through the labor contract for the board, more authority for the principal over the custodian, but we have found that many of the principals are not exercising that authority, and many custodians still dominate or intimidate the educators in the building where they work. We're currently doing investigations into the system, and I expect that we will revisit the issues of the custodial system in the near future.
What authority does the principal have now, for example?
Well, he has more say in the custodian's rating than ever before. It's a question mark, and the rating is everything for a custodian because that gauges whether he gets to go to a larger building. And the larger the building, the more money you make. And we have given custodians, the principals, more power to influence that. Previously they had none, but still they're not exercising that power enough, and that is one of the things we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember in the early 90s there were a lot of scandals and investigations involving the leasing of school buildings and the construction of school buildings. I haven't heard too much about it recently. What changes have been made in there? Okay,
well, of course, the School Construction Authority has a great deal of jurisdiction over that area, which I'm not involved with. But what we found in our investigations was that the Board of Education was really not vetting the properties very well and the owners, so that you would have the Board of Education coming into a neighborhood where properties were very low, but the landlords would see them coming, buy up buildings or hold them back and make it very expensive for the board to buy them.
Yeah, I remember there was some abandoned buildings in East New York and in the South Bronx, which the Board of Education paid millions of dollars for, or enter into long-term leases, which enabled the owner to make millions of dollars.
Yeah, and you see in a situation where you get a long-term lease on a school, the Board of Ed will typically put a great deal of money into the renovation. Mm-hmm. At that point, really, the Board of Ed has agreed to lease it forever. So there is an extraordinary premium that the landlords get out of this. And a part of what we were saying at the time was that you have to be much more careful who you deal with and in your negotiating strategy, because advantage was being taken.
So do you think that as a result of these things that we're not going to have that kind of problem coming up more often?
You know, again, I think my philosophy is that the problems are never finished. They're abated, and you have to always be vigilant. I'm still concerned about the fact that the Board of Ed, which is put in a difficult position because many communities don't want more schools, so they need space. There's a limited amount of big spaces, and when the board goes shopping, people are going to know about it. So I am not going to say that we're not going to have that problem in the future. I hope that we've empowered the board to have to be a little more savvy in screening the landlords and valuing the property.
Okay, so if you looked at the question of the school boards and the custodians and the leasing and construction, what is the biggest area that you now are looking into where there might be possible problems in the school system?
Well, there are a few areas. One thing that I'm concerned about, and we recently did a big case in Queens, is that enormous amounts of money are being spent, not only here in New York, but also elsewhere in the country, on computers, which is great. Unfortunately, some of the districts are still maintaining too much control over that authority and abusing it. So that in District 29, what we found was that the former superintendent...
Where's District 29?
In Queens, I'm sorry. Yeah. That the former superintendent was taking hundreds of $1,000s of bribes to give contracts for inflated computers. Now, so much money was being spent that the district couldn't afford to maintain the computers or get cartridges. So and when the machines broke down, they couldn't get them fixed. So you had this horrible situation where bribes were resulting in the district spending so much money that they couldn't have ink for the printers, and the kids were being deprived. And that was a huge case that we did in the Queen's DA's office this fall. That is an area, computers and internet.
One of the things I find is a problem with computers is the fact that they tend to disappear too. You have to be sure that the computers are not stolen.
Yeah. One of the things I would really like to see is that the Board of Ed use its bargaining power to exercise more control over what gets bought and get quality assurance. If you look at what happened in District 29, those computers were horribly overpriced, and I think the board could do a lot better, and I think that going forward they will.
Well, I know when I did my study of the budget of the Board of Education in 1994, one of the things I found was that books were being bought at retail by some of the schools instead of being bought either by the entire school district or by the board, because anyone who knows anything about books knows that if you buy 5 books, you get a huge discount, so that you don't need to buy at retail. Has that problem been solved?
I don't know that it has. I'm not sure. I believe that Central Board of Ed can get better discounts because of volume.
Sure.
And a lot of the districts are not taking advantage of that. So again, I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of people romanticize decentralization as community power, but you have an enormous value in buying power, being a school system of this size. And what I would say is that to the extent we can take advantage of that power, we should do so, so we have money for teachers and other things.
Okay, we'll be back after these announcements.
I'll take Simmons.
Give me Jones.
Anderson.
Swiftka.
Lightfoot.
Smith.
Hernandez.
Bishop.
Peavy.
Yes.
In the game of life, you've got a better chance at getting picked for a cool job with great pay. If you take algebra, geometry, and calculus, you need to know how math can improve your future. Demand it. Call NACME. We'll tell you. Get in the game.
I hang out with a pretty trashy circle, the circle that helps this circle. It starts when we recycle trash. It's completed when we buy products made from recycled materials. Check the label for post-consumer recycled content. Buy the highest percentage you can find. Complete the circle.
For your free shopping guide, call 1-800-2-RECYCLE.
We're back today with Edward Stancik, the Special Commissioner of Investigations for the New York City School District. Ed, you have come under criticism by the United Federation of Teachers because of an investigation that you conducted, which is somewhat different from the things we've talked about up to now, and that is an investigation of cheating on tests. Tell us how that started and what's been going on there.
Well, the Board of Education has responsibility for investigating cheating. It is not an area that we've normally gone into. But what happened in 1998 was that at a school in the Bronx, teachers who had reported that they were being pressured to cheat by the principal and others.
To cheat on what?
On the kids' standardized exam, to raise the scores to make it appear as if the children were doing better.
What grade was that?
There were several grades involved, but all elementary school and junior high. Mm-hmm. And what happened was that they got so frustrated with the board dragging its feet that came to us. Well, we were able to document that, in fact, there were very sophisticated schemes at that school. And we documented 7 educators and the principal taking part in that corruption.
But what did they do? Did they change the marks of the students?
Okay,
did
there
they
were
give
several
them
things.
higher marks, or
Yes, there were several things they did. First of all, in some cases, they would outright erase the answers and fill in the right answers. In other cases, they would have the kids fill out the answers on a sheet of scrap paper first, then come by and point out wrong answers so the kids would change them. And they would focus on kids that were sort of in between. They would figure that the good kids, the smart kids, will do well enough. There are some that they can't help, so they would try to boost the scores in the middle.
And the whole classroom knew about this, or was it done individually?
It was done individually. They would walk around the classroom, and part of what was really wrong about this was they were sending a very distorted message to the kids, because the kids were thinking that this was okay, and they're coming around and correcting their answers.
How could they think that the kids wouldn't go and talk to each other or talk to their parents?
Well, you have to understand how for children, first of all, they're...
I mean, assuming, say, these are 13, 14-year-old kids.
Well, the older kids, I think they had to be a little bit more sophisticated. But, you know, children don't want to admit that their scores aren't as good as they look. They don't know whether they've done something wrong. So I think a lot of children were hesitant. And the school was putting such pressure on the teachers, and they were getting so sophisticated that they were able to tell the kids that this was appropriate. Well, at that school, we documented widespread abuse, and then we started looking at other schools around the city and found more and more.
And did you find that that practice had been going on for some time?
Oh, yes.
Or that began in 1998?
No, it had been going on for several years, and in fact, at that time, the board's internal investigators, which have been revamped as a result, at that time, not only had they done a very poor job of investigating the cases, they had also lost their files. So oftentimes, we would go back on cases that they had investigated and ask them what they found, and they told us, we don't know, we lost our file.
Okay, but give me an example in one of the schools that you investigated. To what extent were the grades moved up? Was it a very substantial amount, or only like 10%, or what?
We had one school that in particular that we focused on, IS 450 here in Manhattan. That was a school that was under major criticism, in fact, on the state review list because of bad scores, and they had a dramatic improvement overnight to get off that.
Like what's dramatic? Like
the reading scores went up from 16% 1 year to 67% 2 years later.
And that was attributable to the principal putting pressure on the teachers?
Well, what we found was that teachers throughout the school, and we focused really on 2. There were other more evidence of cheating, but we focused on 2. They were telling kids which answers were wrong and telling them to change them. So when you look at an answer sheet, you would see all these changes from wrong to right. Now, the Board of Ed does an analysis of erasures. And if a student gets more than 5 erasures from wrong to right, that gets flagged. Well, in that school, 22% of the students had 5 or more wrong to right. So there were a lot of kids who were changing their answers more than virtually any other school we looked at. Then we talked to the students who confirmed that there had been cheating.
But if this was a widespread practice in different schools throughout the district, that would really affect dramatically the results that we all read about in the newspapers, wouldn't it?
No question, but I want to be careful about one thing. We found cheating at some 40 schools, and that's enough to say that it's not isolated. I'm not saying at this point that it's rampant or it's really widespread. I think you have to be cautious about that, but it's a problem and it needs paying attention to. And it is not just here. That was the biggest scandal anywhere in the country in terms of numbers of educators involved. But there have been many scandals similar to this in other cities around the country.
So then what is the complaint that the union has about your
well,
review?
The union essentially hired some private investigators. You have to understand that from day one, the union was bashing our investigation. And they hired some investigators to reinvestigate. And they turned out this fancy 145-page report saying, in essence, that we were biased, that we put pressure on kids to admit that they were cheating, that we were unfair to teachers, and that we didn't get parental consent for interviews, and it goes so on down the line. But if you look at that report carefully, you can see that it is terribly flawed. For example, we recommended that 13 educators be fired.
Okay.
In fact, in 12 of those cases, at this point, the union has admitted they have no evidence. Or, I'm sorry, they've not produced any evidence. So 12 of the 13 most important cases, they've got no information on.
Were they fired, the ones you recommended?
The 13 that we recommended are in the disciplinary process to be fired.
Now, for my information, is what they did a crime, or is it merely an infraction which could result in being fired?
An infraction. We did not charge anybody with a crime. Okay. But the ones we charged, we asked to be fired, had some aggravating factor. In other words, one teacher, for example, called up her students after we were questioning them and tried to confuse them and get them not to cooperate with us. We found that to be an aggravating factor and recommended that she be fired. But anyway, their report has been out for 3 months, and they have produced virtually no evidence to back it up. Contrast that with our report. On day one, we had 1,000 documents of all of our investigative steps ready for the Board of Ed to review on file, and they've been ready for the board to review at any point. With respect to the UFT report, they have not produced any evidence as far as I know.
Now, these tests, are these tests that are prepared by the Board of Regents or by the individual principals?
No, in this case, they would be the citywide examinations.
And who prepares those?
They're prepared by McGraw-Hill.
Okay. And
everybody in the city takes the same.
Everybody takes the same test.
Right.
So wouldn't it be a better idea if it were marked by somebody else than the teachers, since it's a standardized citywide test? Wouldn't that remove the possibility and bring to an end the arguments about who did what?
Well, outside proctors certainly have advantages and have been used in other tests. Whether that's feasible on a large scale, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that virtually all of our cases have been upheld or are still pending. And the UFT to date has not produced any interviews, any documents, any tapes, and for a great deal of time, we're refusing to cooperate with the Board of Education. So I think what we're going to be going forward saying in the near future, or in fact, by the time this show airs, put up or shut up. If they've got evidence, bring it out, but they have not backed up their report.
So the UFT denies that the cheating took place, is that it?
Yes. Most of it, yes.
Yeah. Well, but how would they prove that it didn't if you have proof that it did?
Well, they say they have interviews, witnesses they've spoken with, analyses, but they haven't produced any of them. So Right now, our report is backed by 1,000 documents, and theirs is backed by a vapor trail.
Okay, and what is the next step? How is that going to be resolved?
Well, I'm going to the board and essentially lay out my findings and say that if the teachers' union has any evidence, bring it forward. Now, I've done some investigating of my own, and in my view, my case today is even stronger, much stronger than it was when we released the report in December. So, you know, you never know. Maybe they've got evidence, maybe they don't.
Okay.
But I want to see it.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, so we'll have to read about it in the newspapers.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can reach us by email at our website, www.cuny.tv, or write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016.